It's lovely to e-meet all of you. My name's John, and I'm really looking forward to going through some of my error correction tips and tricks, and perhaps allowing you to learn from some of my past mistakes. So I am the Director of Studies at EF London. We are on a lovely campus in the middle of London, and we see a range of different students from many different age groups and many different nationalities. So I really have seen a lot of students, and a lot of students have reacted in very different ways to error correction. So I hope to talk to you about that today. So first, a little bit about me. Why am I here talking to all of you lovely people? So I've been at EF for 2 years as Director of Studies. Believe it or not, I originally learned how to teach to continue traveling. So I started in Australia, and then I kept going and hopped from continent to continent until COVID caught up with all of us and I had to return home. And I have been lucky enough to teach in 10 plus countries, which is a fun fact about me. I'm very, very lucky and privileged indeed to do so. But you haven't come here to hear about my life. You've come here to talk about the thrilling topic of error correction. So let's do this. So today, like any good lesson, we'll start with our objective. So I would like you to come away with some new error correction techniques from this class. I've tried to make this session very practical. I've tried to steer clear of the theoretical aspects of stuff because I am aware that you are teachers, you want to bring your students new things from these webinars, and I hope that you can do that following this session. And finally, I think something that is very valuable in the classroom is I'd like to kind of start the conversation with you all about selecting the correct error correction tool for the correct situation. Sometimes it can be tough in a classroom to step out and correct error correction or correct students on their errors. And I hope to kind of start your thought process on that. So first up, a quiz. Yes, you all thought you'd escaped quizzes by going to this webinar, but that is not the case. So error correction. Do you think this term is A, positive, B, negative, or C, neutral? Could everyone please in the Zoom chat type A, B, or C? What are your thoughts? We got some A's, we got some C's, we got some A's. Okay, lovely. Good stuff. Lots of A's. We've got a B, our first B coming in. Thank you for being honest. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. What a lovely audience. Thank you very much. So it really is something that is down to your own personal learning history, isn't it? I remember when I was studying, error correction from some students was from some teachers was wonderful, while from others I didn't really like it. I'm not entirely sure why. It can be down to kind of the personality and the relationship that you have between those that in that kind of dynamic. Now, to me, now it's a positive term. Especially if you're teaching adults. Adults crave error correction. They absolutely adore it, and that's why they've come to the school. They've come here for you to help perfect their language. Whereas I'm aware that a lot of you, I see Ida there. For kids, it's normally B. Yes, it can be difficult to outrightly error correct kids and teenagers. I hope to give you a couple of techniques where you could kind of find a way around that later on in this presentation, in this webinar, I should say. But it can be challenging to bring error correction into a teenage or young learner classroom, for sure. So that first question went so well. Let's have a second question. So when do you think error correction should happen? So give me an A, a B, or a C at the end, at the start, or throughout the lesson. Vote now. Wow, lots of responses. You are all on the ball today. Let's see what we've got. We've got a lot of C's, some A's as well throughout the lesson. Okay, at the end of activities, interesting. So consistently. Okay, A's or C's. Now, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think C is the most popular answer for sure. I think the depending, Gunnar, you make a good point, depending on the goal of the lesson for sure. If you are looking for perhaps fluency over accuracy, you may be, reducing your error correction to empower students to produce more and to produce more naturally without those nerves that they sometimes get. But of course, if you're doing a grammar lesson on a specific point, perhaps you're doing the pronunciation of the ED in the past simple, and you need the accuracy to allow students to move on and progress, then you perhaps be doing error correction slightly more. For me, I think A, B, and C, absolutely all correct. C kind of is A and B at the end of the day. So if you think about error correction not as a single stage in a lesson, but rather something that's organic, something that perhaps you may be planning at the start of your teaching and slowly becomes a natural habit or a kind of instinct. That's where you would like to go to in the kind of at the end of the day. So I went on the internet the other day and I did some reading on error correction and what other people kind of thought about it. Now, this quote resonated with me that it may not actually be effective to perform correctly in target language. So it may not benefit the learner specifically to allow them to perform their target language. So perhaps letting students get away with the odd slip or in fact, sometimes even massive blunder may be beneficial to their growth. At the end of the day, if you're being corrected on every single error that you make, you'll never be free enough to settle into the class and produce your best language. Now, this was counterbalanced here later on in the article about the overcorrection of errors, especially at beginners. It's definitely unproductive. It can become quite confusing and misleading to the learner. So quite often error correction needs to go hand in hand with allowing a student to find their own path in the language. You won't, obviously, you as teachers know that you won't be able to empower your students to produce perfect C2 language at the start of their studies. But by little, you can iron out those small kind of areas. Now, another couple of things that kind of guided this webinar, if you will. Error correction is often regarded as the most exhausting and time-consuming aspect of teachers' work. Can anyone guess? What do you think this teacher was error correcting? What skill? Was it reading, listening, writing, speaking? What skill do you think they're talking about here? We got grammar, we got writing, grammar, writing, 2 exclamation marks from Erica. Erica, no, somebody just marked an essay. Yes, it's writing, and to an extent, also the person that put grammar in there, it could be marking the grammar of writing as well. That can be quite time consuming, certainly. Now, however, you've got this kind of, you're pouring your heart and soul into your lessons, you're pouring your heart and soul into your feedback. And quite often students are very eager to have your feedback and they do benefit from it. But at what cost? Of course, you're not able to mark writing every single day and you're Students certainly wouldn't want to produce writing every single day. But is, this kind of more traditional, more structured marking of writing necessarily the best way to error correct in every single situation? So we had some mixed opinions. It's wide-ranging and it's complex error correction. You error correct over a mass of skills. You error correct when somebody gives the wrong answer. You error correct when someone mispronounces a word, when somebody misconjugates a verb, when somebody perhaps could be aiming higher in their writing. It is something that is pervasive in what we are doing as teachers. And Abdulaziz makes a nice point about imperfections as well, how error correction may, in some eyes, be rightfully a slightly outdated term, and you may want to call them imperfections. That's sure. So perhaps imperfection correction, which rhymes, which is fantastic, is wide ranging. It's all over what we do. Now, it's individual to the learner, which makes it very, very difficult for a teacher to do effectively. Error correction can make a learner very anxious, especially when they don't have the rapport with a teacher as you would hope for them to have. So some error corrections may work very, very well for you in your class and may not work well for the class of another. You also don't necessarily know the learning history of a student, or perhaps you are aware, perhaps they they've struggled learning a language before, so they may react negatively to error correction, especially certain types of error correction, which we'll get into later. And error correction is programmed into every learner differently. So the way that they take it on board and the reason that they want error correction is completely different from learner to learner. An adult student may want pretty consistent error correction to a point where you think that it's going to affect their fluency, whereas we've all had those teenage learners who are perhaps a little bit too cool for school and perhaps don't like being error corrected in front of other people because of this coolness. Now, what ways do you correct your students' imperfections, let's say? What ways do you like to do it? So I'll just give you 1 minute in the chat. Just tell me, what do you like to do to correct errors? On the board, echoing, very nice, good. And yes, Araceli, yes, that third thing is very tough for teachers. I totally agree. Rephrasing in groups, all peer corrections. Feels like somebody's read my slides. Very good. Yes, on in groups, very good. Recasts, echo correction, good. I usually try to find the pattern before correcting. Oh, okay. So kind of looking at those fossilized errors, which we'll get into later as well. Very good. Yeah, talking to students is important, Sophia. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, echoing. Notebooks, that's nice. Somebody raised a very interesting point, Layla, I think it was, about proficiency level. It really does vary from proficiency level to proficiency level. Do you have to make it a kind of clear teaching point, perhaps for a lower level, or at a higher level, can you mention it in passing? Very good. Or the sandwich method, that's very nice. Lovely sandwich. Good. Okay, lead pencil to correct errors. That's nice. Good. Okay. And we also have a couple of areas that people are commenting on whether it's an individual error or it's a group error. Is the group making these errors, and should I bring that error of the individual to the group if they're all doing it, or if one person's doing it, does the group need to know as well? Is that individual strong enough to take, knowing that their error is on the board in front of everyone to see? Perhaps a weaker student may wilt at kind of that idea. So yes, all very, very important considerations to make. Thank you, everybody. Really good. Okay. Apologies if you hear some background noise. I have some spirited students in the background. So let's plow on anyway. So let's start with writing. So writing is often, to some, the most time-consuming part of being a teacher. I always found that my planning sped up much faster than my marking of writing. And I found that no matter how hard I tried, if I marked quickly, I wasn't giving enough feedback, and if I marked slowly, I couldn't find a work-life balance. So it is one of those error correction in writing is one of those very kind of fragile things. And then, especially if a lot of people in this room probably teach teenagers or young learners and perhaps even some adults. And you think, do you actually read this? You know, when you see they put the piece of paper at the bottom of their backpack, never to be seen again. And perhaps you'll see it 2 months later as they clean out their bag. It can be disheartening. But for every moment like that, there are a lot of kind of more positive moments and more uses that you have for your feedback, which we'll get onto later. And of course, some schools have a school code, which you'll need to learn or need to teach to your students. EF have a writing code, which is followed by our teachers, which obviously needs some learner training, which takes up time in class, and it takes up your time to learn the code as well. Usually the idea of it is to promote guided discovery. Oh, I see this spelling mistake. I've got to look up where the spelling is. But Araceli says, not keen on school codes. They seem too impersonal. Yeah, okay. Now, here are some of my ideas around error correction in writing. And Louise says they don't look them up. It's too true, Louise. You're so right. They truly don't. So let's spice them up. Some of you may have seen some of my other webinars that I've done for Teacher Zone. I believe I did Spicing Up Your Life by Spicing Up Your Book. Spicing up is something that I often write on my teacher's observations. I think that it's one of the keys to a happy class, and obviously one of the keys to a happy teacher if there's a happy class. And what I mean by spicing up is just adding that extra teacher sparkle to something. So, of course, we think of the basics of teaching as taking in our writing, giving the writing back. The students look at their errors for 5 minutes, they put them in their bags, they do it better next time. But these techniques that I've put on the board, I found have brought that laughter back to writing that quite often was lost in my early lessons when I was doing this. So the feedback gallery walk. Everybody loves a gallery walk. Students love to stand up. Of course, this is dependent on the space in your classrooms, but students love standing up, walking around, refocusing for the next exercise. Teachers love it. You just put something on the wall, you get the feedback from them. You get to walk around and interact and actively monitor. Very, very beneficial. So the feedback gallery walk can be used in two different ways. The first way is if you have a class that are particularly confident with giving peer feedback, which I understand is not for every class. I never would say that error correction is one size fits all. But if you have an error correction on the board or somebody's writing on the board, perhaps you have a letter to, I don't know, a letter to a pen pal written, and you've stuck them around the walls, and then students have a separate piece of paper underneath where they can annotate there. Nancy Ford says, can gallery walks be adapted for online classes? Yes. I used to use shared presentation on slides where students used to have their work on each slide and they'd skip through the slides, and it would be kind of like they're walking. They'd just be going from place to place to place in breakout rooms, and allow the students to share their screens in the breakout room so they can feel that they're moving from place to place. So that's one. Students leave feedback on their own, on each other's work in the gallery. Now, of course, the benefit of this is it validates what you're doing when you're marking their writing. They can see what you're trying to do, the feedback you're trying to give them. They can kind of feel, oh yes, this is a valuable thing. Somebody telling me about my writing. Fantastic. They understand it. And of course, peer feedback will hopefully allow students to learn from the imperfections or the errors of others, so they can internalize this kind of like different elements. But of course, peer observation is no substitution for peer error correction is no substitution for error correction itself. So another idea for gallery walks is for your marked writing, so students' marked writing that you marked up on the wall, so that everyone can go around and see if they can recognize any common imperfections or common errors. So they're not going around now to say, oh, that's this error here, that's this error here. They're coming around to say, right, so we're all doing this. And if you're a school that use journaling, then you can add this to some sort of imperfection journal or error journal. We all made this error in our writing before. Now, I've a very good question from the chat there. What happens if the peer feedback is correct? Yes, and we've all had it. Now, that is a learning opportunity for everyone. Of course, as a teacher, you are monitoring, you're making sure the everything is correct anyway. So while monitoring, you pick up on the correction not actually being a correction, a second error. Hopefully, you have the opportunity at the end of the class to say, this is one, this is another. Neither are quite correct. Now work as a team, as a big class. What is the correct one? So you take it as, rather than a kind of a problem, you take it as a learning opportunity for the class. Now, theft, usually a terrible thing, but students picking things to steal from each other is a fantastic way to get students kind of critically thinking about their work and critically thinking about the work of others. So again, this can work with unmarked and marked work. Students perhaps sitting down this time, they're in a pair, they read a piece of work and they look and they think, what part of this writing do I admire? What do I want to steal for myself? What do I want to, dare we say, copy? Now, of course, you'd want to pre-teach, maybe don't copy in exams, but this is a good time to steal from each other so you can do it in your exams. And it adds a kind of fun little element to it, where perhaps at the end you have a table, students have whose work did I steal from, and they write the things that they stole, and makes everybody feel good. You know, my work was good enough to be stolen. Comparing and contrasting work is an interesting one. So if you perhaps have the opportunity to remove the names, I think from this one would be really important. Removing the names from the comparing and contrasting work, and then give students two versions of work, maybe their own work and something that is equivalent, and they get to write 3 similarities and 3 differences on their work. This can be a really nice way of just noticing the gap between perhaps where they should be and where they could be, or perhaps their good writing to great writing, or perhaps even how to kind of, or perhaps even this is your writing, you're doing fantastically, this is something else. Look at how, you know, it's changed like things to make it look different. Why not try that? So to add some more diversity to people's writing. And of course, they're ever nerve-inducing student mark each other's work with the school key. So a benefit of this, of course, would be that the students would learn the school key and be able to use it for themselves and understand it when you give feedback. But Of course, this is quite time consuming. You may not use a key. You may not want to use a key. I definitely wouldn't want to say that that is the best way necessarily of marking writing. It is one way of marking writing. But it's often a fun little task for students to do, point out the spelling, etc., etc. I've seen a couple of comments in the chat, rightfully so, about awareness and self-esteem. All of these things are fantastic benefits of peer feedback. And you've actually anticipated my question. I believe I may be quite predictable today. But if everyone could in the chat, we've already had, raising self-esteem, all those kind of things. What are some benefits and what are some drawbacks of peer feedback? I'll just give you 1 minute, just a rest from my voice. Some benefits and some drawbacks, do you think, on peer feedback? Ooh. KW says higher level with peer corrections can be difficult because you have at that level you have to have a very good understanding of collocations and very specific language. So yes, that can be tough. So Annette, what if somebody doesn't like another student and gives bad marks on purpose? That would be when you start erasing the name, perhaps. Obviously, students do tend to kind of learn what each other's handwriting looks like, at which point you ask them to complete it on a computer to add anonymity. But of course, maybe feedback isn't that class if it's a difficult one. It can demotivate others if it's not positive. But at the same time, some students don't feel judged by their peers. You're right. All can lead to fossilized mistakes for Salah. Very nice meta language. We'll be talking about that later. Don't you worry. Applicable at higher levels, yes. They may feel incompetent to peer. Interesting. They may not feel they have the ability to peer correct. That is an interesting one. I suppose that would be something that comes with learner training and kind of the self-esteem angle of stuff. Because of course, peer feedback isn't an easy thing, and it leads to both sides potentially being exposed. And yes, sometimes peer feedback will take a number of sessions to get right. You will need to kind of reduce that affective filter and make students feel more relaxed in class to be able to comfortably do that. But I'm sure every student is capable, but perhaps not every student thinks they're capable. Just a couple more. We've got builds confidence. We've got learner autonomy. Lovely stuff. Good. Okay. Wonderful. And I think it's also quite important to point out that peer feedback quite often doesn't lead to an end mark. The pitfalls of peer observation is that students are forced to judge each other. And quite often, if you give somebody a rubric, say the IELTS rubric, and somebody's piece of work, they're going to either score them much higher because they don't want to hurt their feelings, or they'll score them much lower because they perhaps they see themselves as harsh critics or better than someone. And yeah, giving marks in peer feedback can be quite a tricky game, so be careful doing that kind of thing. All right. Timing. Error correction in class. Now, error correction in class for me is something that certainly takes practice. It's writing, at least you can do it in your own time. So you can sit down, perhaps you've got a lovely cup of tea on the go. It's just finished. You've just finished your nightmare class, and you just want to unwind, get some marking done, maybe listen to the radio, and that's done in your own time away from your class. Whereas error correction in class is in front of everybody. The timing needs to be spot on. The choice of error correction, the technique needs to be spot on. So for me, this can be the most anxiety inducing for teachers, especially newer teachers. Now, I'd just like to kind of reaffirm a couple of things. That error correction can happen at any point in the lesson. So you've got on the spot error correction, where you perhaps echo something. I saw a lot of people in the chat mentioning echoing the correct form back to students. That can happen on the spot. Perhaps you heard a pronunciation error. So rather than, table, table. You've got your fingers as tools, you've got your hands as tools. Perhaps you heard a incorrect placement of stress in a sentence. So on the spot error correction, right there, right then and there. Now, of course, being careful with on the spot error correction is key. You wouldn't want to stagnate the rhythm of your class. You wouldn't want to slow the action down. A good class should kind of feel like it's on a steady pace on the way to a destination. And if you're interrupting that destination constantly by stopping at every, I don't know, petrol station, if we're going through this metaphor, then it can feel like a very long journey. So be careful with that on the spot error correction. Try not to overuse that one. And delayed error correction, the classic. You wait until everybody's finished speaking. Perhaps you've written 3 errors on the board as to not alienate any student. Maybe you've gone the extra distance and you've turned it into a small exercise. You've got the incorrect collocation gap there. You've got the correct one there. Which one's correct? Delayed error correction at the end of an activity. Now, the forms that it takes, as you've seen with me doing this and saying, oh, maybe you could create a quick exercise in the background. You've got your classic boarded error correction. Perhaps you've got multiple colored pens. I know I'm a colored pen kind of guy. So making that clear, making perhaps green the different syllables, red the stress of the word, correcting people that way. You've got body language. I see Sophia says that body language is effective. Perhaps even the raise of your kind of eyebrow. I can't really do it very well. Are you sure? Yeah, something like that. Gesturing, one of those. Quite subtle. Of course, these kind of error correction forms with body language can't be too aggressive. They can't be too grand in their expressiveness, but small, subtle things that aren't easily recognizable to an entire class and certainly don't produce kind of or create laughter at the expense of the other students is, yes, interesting. And gesture enjoyable drama everywhere from Sebnem. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. If your students know you and they know your little quirks and they think it's quite dramatic, then yes, that can be quite an enjoyable part of a lesson. And it will never look the same from class to class. Some of you very, very lucky people may have the same level twice in a week or the same type of class twice in a week. So you only need to prepare one lesson plan, all you lucky people. But at the end of the day, the error correction you do in one lesson will never be the error correction you do in the second lesson. It's very, very difficult to plan it. And of course, you can plan for anticipated errors, but you can't plan for any kind of definite errors. And all we can do is correct them as they come along, correcting with games, making things fun. Yes, some very good ideas there from in the chat. So a couple of ideas, as I said, with hand gestures. As I said earlier, with board work with different colors. We've got differentiation on the board. Perhaps you've got the wrong, the correct, which one is there. So you turn it into a classic textbook circle the correct answer exercise. Of course, some schools of thought suggest that you should never show somebody anything incorrect, otherwise they may internalize it. Others say that you need to be able to identify an error to be able to kind of choose the correct version of something. For me, choosing between the correct and the incorrect thing is always a nice thing for them to do. It's also something that students are generally very familiar with, so they should be able to complete the task quite well because they would have done so in their textbooks. A quick quiz. So a quick quiz is perhaps you've written 5 errors down on a piece of paper. You've got 5 questions on the board using the errors. The students race to tell you what the errors are and how they can correct them. The fastest student wins, I don't know, a solitary clap, like a round of applause. Is always fun. We've got a couple of very good suggestions coming in from everybody in the chat, which I will come to at the end of my ones, I promise. Error of the day is something that I introduced. I remember I was in a very advanced class in Vietnam, and students had very specific fossilized errors, and they had been studying together for years and years, since they were 11 and they were about 16 at the time. So they all had the same fossilized errors. And it was a bizarre thing of me telling them that something was an error or an imperfection, as we said earlier. And for them to all say, no, you're wrong. No, we've always done it like this. You can't be right. So the introduction of an error of the day system, where I used to put something on the board, an error. So for example, overpronouncing the H in chat or chat. And each time the error was made, the team of which are the students would lose a point. And if they got to -5 points, they wouldn't get their kind of, I don't know, chocolate. Yes, I can imagine a cute board to place errors on, Erica. Yeah, you can put a lovely little board on the error board, have a little tally underneath them. There's nothing can go wrong with a lovely display in a classroom for sure. Now, a couple of the kind of ideas we've seen is we've got the exit ticket from Shebnem in the chat. Now, exit ticket, students have to get something correct as they leave the classroom. That can be for an error, for sure. That can be for new vocabulary, new grammar, what have you. Sentence formation, very nice. Especially if your school distributes maybe a small award at the end for a student being good, perhaps like a little sticker. That can be a very nice idea as well. Nice. Now, a couple of kind of key things for consideration. Obviously, not all error correction techniques are made equal, and not all error correction techniques will work for every class. Now, for me, when I'm observing somebody and they are in the midst of error correction, the first thing that it needs to be is clear. Without clarity, error correction becomes tremendously confusing. If a correction is made to one student and it's perhaps just made to them and none of the other students hear it, and then somebody else makes the correction, perhaps you look at the other student and go, it's this, right? It can cause a divide in the class. In an ideal world, you have a column for your vocabulary on the board, and perhaps you have a space for error correction where you can immortalize this error correction here. It needs to be consistent. If you're using your fingers to show people kind of the syllables of a word and to correct for syllables of the word, you want to be doing this consistently. Chopping and changing with error correction can be another source of confusion for students. Perhaps showing syllables in different ways with lines rather than slashes on the board can be another form of confusion. So make sure you've got your own code, as it were. We've got it can't make a student anxious. We've already covered that, and it must be interactive. The students need to participate in what you're doing. Writing something on the board and saying this is that. Okay, everyone, moving on. Students will not be able to internalize that. they will not be able to kind of see the errors. Students should be able to recognize it themselves and correct it for themselves, and then you can move on. Now, obviously, gamification of the errors of a range of errors is fantastic. Perhaps you have the time to note down errors throughout a week and have a Kahoot on a massive error correction session. That's wonderful. But all of these things in common have one thing in common, sorry, and that is being purposeful, as Aracelli has said. You need to have a clear idea of why you're doing this, and the students need to understand that you are doing this for the purpose of them having better pronunciation, them being more effective with their grammar. So purpose is always key. So we've just got a couple of things that perhaps aren't so effective in my eyes. You may disagree with me, which to me is the kind of best part about being a teacher. We all have different experiences and different opinions, and that's what drives the profession to be better and better year on year. Getting students just to read a text or read something and say, this is the correct one. Now just do it again. So you're expecting students to notice errors, perhaps without highlighting anything. They almost certainly won't be able to get it, and you're not encouraging students to think critically. There's not enough purpose in that text. Of course, I've actually seen a lot of people mention this really importantly in the chat, throughout the chat, and I haven't been ignoring you, I promise. I wanted to get to this point here, and that's kind of snap, perhaps less friendly and more abrupt, kind of stop, not that. Read it again, not good enough. Now, of course, a lot of people in the chat here have said, no, definitely don't want to be doing that, but ensuring that you are respectful of what's happening, you are respectful of the student, respectful of their time, they're here to learn. You want to be respectful of their feelings, just as a student should be respectful for you. Now, I see somebody saying it depends on the level. I agree with you that you may want to have kind of shorter corrections for lower levels. So you may want to go something like, but for me, saying not that can increase anxiety for a student in my classrooms. Perhaps it's different in your classrooms for sure. And you just kind of, as a kind of summarizing moment for this, avoid raising the affective filter, which is meta language for the anxiety and how comfortable somebody feels in class. If they have a low affective filter, it means they're very comfortable, they're very relaxed, they're ready to learn, they're more likely to absorb language. If they have a high affective filter, they are on edge, they are nervous, they don't want to make mistakes, and they are more likely or less likely to be able to kind of get the language that they otherwise would be able to do. And it's always better for another student to say the correction. Now, this is something that I lifted from one of the references earlier, that they said it's always better for another student to say the correction. It's not always true. I don't 100% agree with this statement. But if you can get a student to correct another student, and for that to be a healthy, thriving environment, then why not? So some extra activity ideas for you. Now, we are nearly at my favorite part of the webinar, the swap shop. So don't worry, you will have an opportunity to share your ideas. Now, some extra kind of things you could do for your error correction that I'd like to show you. So, my teacher can't spell is an interesting thing. It's certainly not for those teachers who believe that students shouldn't be exposed to errors. But Students can correct their teacher's writing. This might be a good way to get students into peer correction. Here's my piece of writing. I was really tired last night. I just finished planning all my lessons. I just watched the football, so I was emotionally and physically drained. I wrote this. Can you mark it for me? Students mark away. Ha ha ha, I'm doing this. The teacher's not got everything right now. Ha ha. Hopefully increase the rapport between you and your students. And then they'll realize that what they're doing is just feedback. It's not a positive or a negative thing. They're just helping you to produce a better piece of work. So perhaps the initial stage should be first you correct your teacher, then you can correct each other. So you've trained your students to be neutral with feedback. Now, for those of you who are tech savvier than I, Kahoot, everybody loves it. It's in loads and loads of classrooms. Some classrooms don't have phones, so it makes Kahoot hard. I'm sure you have ways around it with different types of quizzes. Now, error correction Kahoot is classic, a quiz of some errors from the week. I observed one of my teachers who created a Kahoot throughout the lesson and then gave it to their students at the end of the lesson with all of the errors and with some of the extra kind of additional knowledge that they picked up throughout the class, which was jaw-dropping to me. I was truly blown away by that teacher. But if you do have the time and you do have the ability to produce a Kahoot for your students, that's always kind of a nice, comfortable way for them to learn from their errors. A delayed error correction race, as I said before. Now, this would be a list of errors. You race to correct them. Perhaps the first one who finishes gets to choose the game you play at the end of the lesson, something like that. A little bit of gamification there for you all. Yes, very fun. And finally, Snowman. Now, this is a slightly different version. I understand that the game named Hangman can be a bit problematic nowadays, and Snowman is an alternative where students guess the letters, and instead of kind of slowly losing, you have them on two teams. You have Team A, Team B. They both see this phrase here with all the blanks. And what they're doing is they're guessing for points rather than guessing against somebody losing. Or I know I saw somebody play it with a shark kind of coming towards a ship before. But Snowman is A versus B. Each student chooses a letter to fill in the gap. Now, this can be used if somebody has a phrase that's not quite correct. You perhaps put the incorrect phrase there, put the snowman phrase below it. This is a better way of saying this, more natural way of saying this. Let's try to figure it out together. And then you play the game round, and you come together at the end, hopefully with the error corrected. So now it comes on to the swap shop part of the session. So I've given you some of my experiences. I've given you some of the kind of extra activities that I would do. Now, I'll give you maybe 3 minutes per element. And I'd like you to swap your ideas. So the first idea here. Now, what is one error that your students always make? And of course, how do you attempt to correct it? Now, very quickly, could anyone remind me what is the term for an error that is made repeatedly over time? What is the term, the meta language? Fossilized bias. Yes, very good. Everyone remember the word fossilized? I think it might come in useful later on, perhaps after this webinar, who knows? So everybody, I've seen a couple of good answers already. I'll just give you 2 minutes. Could you please tell me an error that your students always make and how you attempt to correct it? So go ahead. I am agree. Sorry, I was just about to say, yeah, I am agree. Yeah, some flashbacks and I am agree. Okay, everyone, so 2 minutes just in the chat. Swap the errors and how you have corrected them. Inspire each other. Remember to add how you corrected them as well. Just give you 1 more minute and then we'll go through a couple of these wonderful ideas. Thank you, Louise. Goodbye. Thanks for coming. We got pronunciation. Just 30 more seconds. I'm just writing down some of your ideas so that I can bring them up. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So I've got a of um couple of correct errors to correct. No, I'm joking. Some lovely ideas that I'd like to share with you. Unfortunately, I didn't note down the names of the people who said that. Sorry. I was too engrossed in all of the wonderful ideas that you have. So if you do hear your suggestion read out by me, congratulations. Yay. So we have dictation, somebody wrote. I think dictation is an interesting one to error correct with. I think dictation on its own may be almost leaning towards hoping that students will understand their errors earlier on. So if, for example, if you do a running dictation without kind of explicitly saying that an error was present, so we're doing a running dictation to error correct, I think that can be quite a difficult one to do. But if you were to do a running dictation of the correct sentence, they run, they do the dictation, and then you use some CCQs to check their understanding. So, you know, is it I have 14 years or I am 14 years old? I am 14 years old. Yeah, good. You just dictated it. Well done. So that is one way of using dictation there. Somebody mentioned the phonemic chart, which is an interesting one, isn't it? 'Cause it takes a lot of it can take a lot of student training, teacher training as well. Phonemic chart is not an easy thing to understand. It does take time to get it right. So using the phonemic chart and use it in activities. If your students are trained to do that, fantastic. If not, try it out, see if it works for you. I don't think that's for every classroom, but it is a nice touch if you can start using it. So somebody wrote oral and written practice, and I'd like to go as far as to say that this practice should be say even more eclectic than just oral and written practice. We should be looking at all of the areas, all different areas of practice and all different error correction techniques. So not just oral and written. Somebody said something that threw me back to the past, where they mentioned drawing a little pair of glasses next to somebody's error in their writing. I think my Spanish teacher used to do that, and I can confirm I have fond memories of the Spanish teacher and those glasses. So whoever wrote that, very nice. So using little annotations rather than more kind of strict school-based keys can be quite nice. And somebody rightfully mentioned at the well, kind of at the end of the cycle of messages that we forgot to mention increased pitch. So we mentioned kind of like the repetition, echoing, use of body language, etc., etc. But of course, we forgot increased pitch. You know, I have 13 years old. No, I am 13 years old. Good, good. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating and helping me through my error correction webinar. I hope that you've had the opportunity, or I've given you a couple of new error correction techniques for you to use in your classes. And I hope that I've also kind of shown you how we can continue to look critically at error correction. You've all been absolutely wonderful. Now, before you go, I would be remiss in my duties if I weren't to show you my references. Now, I did assemble my references very, very quickly. So I am under no illusion that it's not quite Harvard referencing. I did kind of half effort it, if you will. But here are the two people that I based this presentation on. So please do go and give them a read. Very, very valuable error correction work. Now, of course, you now have your quiz questions to complete that I wrote. So please do feel free to do that and grab your certificates. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Bald Man John. Bald Man John, thanks you. And it's been an absolute pleasure, everyone. So until the next webinar, thank you very much. And I hope that you have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.